First of all, please subscribe our channel so you will be notified from our latest videos. Let's start the story. The sun had barely begun its climb over the horizon when the city awoke in a symphony of life and sound. Towering skyscrapers of glass and steel shimmered under the soft morning light, their polished surfaces reflecting the dreams and ambitions of those who strode through the bustling streets below. Between these towering monuments of wealth, the old market thrummed with energy. Vendors shouted their wares, the scent of roasted peanuts and spicy stews mingling with the sharp tang of exhaust fumes from the taxis weaving through the narrow alleys. Bright fabrics fluttered like flags in the wind, and the laughter of children chasing one another between stalls echoed like the drums of forgotten festivals. Here, in this city of contrasts, the world of the rich and the ordinary danced in a delicate, uneasy balance. In one lane, a man in a crisp suit spoke into a phone, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. A few steps away, an elderly woman balanced baskets of tomatoes on her head, her back bent from years of toil. The city whispered secrets to those who listened, that wealth could dazzle, yet humility carried a quiet power, that ambition might build towers, but the soul of the people remained grounded in tradition. At the heart of this vibrant maze stood a restaurant whose very walls told a story of convergence. Modern glass panels stretched skyward, but within, African sculptures and murals told of ancestors and village wisdom. Each table, polished and gleaming, held small tokens of heritage, carved wooden masks, beaded coasters, and bowls painted with symbols of justice and fate. Patrons, dressed in the latest fashions, sipped their coffee beside these echoes of tradition, unaware or perhaps willfully blind to the silent lessons surrounding them. Through the hum of conversation and the clatter of silverware moved Amelie, her step steady, her hands skilled in the art of service honed by years of dedication. She was young, her face bright with hope, yet lined with the subtle marks of responsibility. Her apron, though plain, carried the stories of her family, a mother who had taught her the value of honesty, a father who had reminded her that pride was built not on wealth, but on integrity. Amelie walked among her colleagues with quiet grace, offering smiles and careful attentions, each motion a dance of patience and resilience. And then, through the doors, came a man whose presence seemed to shift the air itself. Tay, tall, commanding, his suit perfectly tailored, his eyes sharp and calculating. He carried an aura of power, of the kind that demanded attention without a single word. Patrons turned subtly to watch, whispering his name like it was a spell, an invocation of both awe and fear. Behind his polished exterior lay secrets, old wounds, and a heart hardened by ambition. Yet even in this fortress of arrogance, there lingered the faintest shadow of guilt, a memory too delicate to confront. Amelie approached with the careful attention of one who had learned early that the world was neither fair nor kind, but that dignity could be carried like a shield. She laid before him the carefully prepared meal, the plate gleaming under the soft light, its contents arranged with both artistry and care. Tay's eyes skimmed the table without warmth, his lips curling slightly, not in appreciation, but in the subtle dismissal of one who believed himself above ordinary gestures. When the meal ended, he left, leaving behind no tip, no acknowledgement, only the faint scratch of a pen across a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the edge of his plate. Amelie's heart stuttered, a pang of humiliation, then curiosity. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the note, sensing that fate had chosen this quiet moment to speak. The folded paper was small, yet carried weight heavier than gold, a whisper of secrets, a harbinger of reckoning, and a question that would soon demand an answer. Around her, the restaurant seemed to pause. The elder mentor watched in the corner, nodding faintly as if he had expected this moment. The co-workers whispered in soft tones, their voices weaving a tapestry of speculation and caution. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, holding their breath. Amelie unfolded the note, and though the words were simple, they carried the weight of destiny, a story hidden beneath a veneer of civility, a moral test that would challenge not just her courage, but the very balance of justice in a world that often forgot its own humanity. Outside, the city continued its march, skyscrapers reflecting ambition, markets humming with life. But inside, at this intersection of wealth and humility, a tale was beginning, one of secrets and revelation, of moral courage and the quiet power of honesty. Amelie, standing at the threshold between ordinary life and the extraordinary consequences of a single discovery, felt the pulse of the city in her veins. She knew, as her ancestors had whispered to her in dreams and stories, that even the smallest act, a folded note, a withheld tip, could shift the winds of fate, carrying the weight of justice, morality, an eternal lesson that no deed, however hidden, escapes the eyes of those who watch in the hands of destiny that guide us all. The restaurant sat like a jewel tucked between the modern towers, its glass walls gleaming as if to announce that within these doors, the ordinary world must pause and behold elegance. From the street, the hum of the city seemed distant, muffled by the soft rhythm of classical music, blending with distant drums from a nearby festival. Inside, light danced across polished tables, glinting off cutlery arranged with meticulous care, but it was the African art and sculptures that captured the eye. Each piece told a story. A carved wooden mask with eyes hollowed, like wells, seemed to watch every movement, as if guarding secrets long hidden. On the walls, murals depicted ancestral wisdom, hunters returning with bounties, elders teaching children under the shade of an ancient baobab, and women carrying baskets heavy with fruit, their heads held high, resilient under the sun. Amelie moved through this space with quiet reverence. She had walked many floors and many streets, yet each step here reminded her that the world she knew outside, the crowded streets, the vibrant markets, the cries of vendors selling everything from spices to colorful fabrics, was a world apart. Here, in this sanctuary of wealth, even the air seemed polished, tinged with the scent of fine coffee and rich sauces. But the symbols around her, the carvings and murals, whispered to her heart. They spoke of justice, of morality, of the power of truth hidden beneath the surface of appearances. It was as if the ancestors themselves had chosen this place to test those who entered, to remind them that every act, no matter how small, carried weight. She approached the table where a man waited, his posture commanding, yet his eyes scanning the menu with practiced attachment. Tay, the very presence of him seemed to sharpen the light, to bend the air around his chair. He wore a suit that had surely been touched by the finest tailors, and his watch gleamed like a shard of sun on his wrist. The staff, who had seen him before, moved with deference, yet Amelie noticed a flicker of impatience in his glance. He was a man accustomed to obedience, to wealth bending the world to his will, yet there was a weight beneath his gaze, a shadow, a quiet tension she could not yet name. Amelie set the first plate before him. Steam rose gently, carrying the aroma of spices that reminded her of her mother's kitchen, of the markets she wandered with coins clenched in small fists. Tay's eyes flicked briefly to the plate, registering the arrangement but giving nothing away. She moved to refill his glass, her fingers steady, her heart mindful of the stories and the carvings that surrounded her. The mask on the wall seemed to watch her, the painted children on the mural almost breathing beneath the light, and she felt the hum of history under her feet. Here, in this space of modern splendor and ancestral presence, every gesture mattered. Every look could hold meaning. The other patrons whispered softly, their voices a low chorus that moved around the room like wind through reeds. Elder mentors at nearby tables exchanged knowing glances, as if they could see the invisible threads connecting wealth, power, and the consequences that would follow. The air was thick with anticipation, not yet spoken aloud, but palpable. Amelie's co-workers cast quick, curious glances her way, sensing the delicate balance between service and scrutiny, between humility and pride. As she placed the final plate before Tay, she noticed something small, tucked beneath the edge, a folded slip of paper, unnoticed by anyone else, resting like a secret beneath the polished surface. She hesitated, sensing its weight, aware that sometimes the smallest things, an unseen glance, a whispered word, a hidden note, could carry the force of fate. Tay did not speak. He adjusted his tie, glanced around the room as if the walls themselves were mirrors, and leaned back in his chair with an air of detachment. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, caught between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the hum of daily life and the stirrings of destiny. Amelie's hands brushed the note, her fingers trembling slightly. The carvings on the walls, the masks that watched silently, and the murals that whispered wisdom all seemed to lean closer. She felt the pulse of the city outside, the taxis honking, the market cries, the laughter of children, and yet within these walls, time slowed. A story was beginning here, one that would test courage, morality, and the enduring truth that no act goes unseen. Every detail mattered. The placement of the plate, the folded paper beneath, the silent gaze of those who had come before. In that moment, Emily understood. The restaurant was more than glass and steel, more than polished floors and fine art. It was a stage where the forces of ambition, morality, and destiny converged. Here, wealth could shine, but it could not hide the truth. Here, humility could meet power, and the smallest act, a hidden note, a glance, a careful step, could tip the scales. And as Tay leaned back, unaware of the eyes that watched and the hands that would soon uncover secrets, Emily felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders. She was no longer merely a server. She was a witness to history, to justice, and to the silent wisdom of the ancestors whose voices echoed in every carved mask, every painted mural, and every subtle gesture of the room. She took a deep breath, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into her apron, feeling the hum of stories yet to unfold. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside, a tale of power, morality, and destiny had begun, and Emily stood at its heart, ready to navigate the path that only courage, wisdom, and the unseen hand of fate could illuminate. Emily moved to the restaurant with a quiet grace, her steps measured, her eyes attentive. She was young, with a spirit that carried both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope. Her hair, tied neatly at the nape of her neck, framed a face that spoke of resilience, eyes alert and warm, lips pressed with determination. Every motion was practiced yet gentle. The way she refilled water glasses, the careful placement of plates, the soft smile offered to patrons. She carried herself not with the pride of wealth, but with the dignity of someone who knew the value of every coin earned honestly. Her apron bore faint stains from years of service, each mark a silent testament to long hours and tireless effort. Yet Emily did not see them as blemishes. They were badges of honor, proof that she had learned the lessons of humility and patience taught to her by her mother, who had once whispered, "Child, the world may bow to wealth, but it is virtue that bends the hearts of those who matter." Her father, who rose before dawn to walk the crowded streets selling small goods, had told her, "Resilience, my child, is the shield no fortune can buy." These teachings were stitched into the very fiber of her being, a mantle of quiet courage that guided her in a world that often overlooked the humble and celebrated the powerful. Emily's dreams were vivid, colored by the market she knew so well, by the laughter of her younger siblings chasing one another down dusty lanes, and by the smell of fresh bread baking in the small ovens near her family home. She dreamed not of extravagance, but of security and dignity, a life where she could provide for her loved ones and honor the community that had raised her. Yet even as she served the city's elite, the contrast between her modest world and the glittering lives around her never escaped her notice. The polished marble, the crystal glasses, the hum of hushed conversations, all spoke of wealth, of power, of ambition. And yet, beneath it, she saw the hollowness of greed, the arrogance that sometimes blinded the wealthy to truth, to morality, and to the lessons of their ancestors. Her colleagues moved beside her, some older, some her age, each carrying stories of their own. There was Moyo, the elder mentor who watched her with knowing eyes, nodding slightly as she approached tables. "Emily," he said softly one morning, "remember, the hands that serve with honesty are never empty. The world may not always see it, but fate notices." His words, gentle yet firm, were a balm when frustration prickled her spirit. And there was Lindai, her friend and fellow waitress, whose laughter lightened the long hours, reminding Emily that even in toil, joy could be found. Despite the long shifts and the unspoken hierarchy of the restaurant, Emily carried a quiet pride. She greeted every patron with respect, regardless of their status, and measured her words with care. Her moral compass was unyielding. She did not flinch from doing what was right, even if it meant discomfort or misunderstanding. She understood the subtleties of her world, that actions, no matter how small, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways unseen. Every careful pour of water, every folded napkin, every patient explanation of a dish to a confused customer was a gesture of integrity. When she paused at a table near the large window, she watched the city beyond, the skyscrapers catching the morning sun, the streets alive with vendors calling out their wares, children weaving through crowds with bare feet and bright eyes. Her heart swelled with a desire to rise, not over others, but alongside them, lifting her family, her community, and herself toward a life that honored both effort and virtue. One day, she whispered to herself, barely audible over the hum of the restaurant, one day, what I carry inside will shine as brightly as the lights in these towers. And yet, Amelie's modesty was her strength. She did not crave attention. She craved justice, honesty, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. In her, the old ways and the new world coexisted. She carried the wisdom of her elders and the hope of tomorrow, a bridge between tradition and modernity. As she moved toward a table where a distinguished man waited, her heart steadied, her gaze clear. She knew that moments, even small ones, had power. A single gesture, a single word could alter destinies. And Amelie, guided by the lessons of her ancestors, understood that courage was not loud. It was steadfast, patient, and unwavering, like the baobab trees that had watched generations come and go. Her eyes met the man's briefly as she placed the plate before him. He was composed, confident, almost untouchable in his demeanor. Yet Amelie did not falter. She smiled politely, her voice steady. "Good morning, sir. Your meal is served." The words were simple, yet beneath them flowed a quiet strength, a moral certainty that could not be ignored. And in that fleeting moment, even the bustling city outside, with its bright lights and endless movement, seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the arrival of a young woman who carried within her the heartbeat of community, the wisdom of her elders, and the promise that integrity, when placed before ambition, would always have its voice heard. Amelie straightened, ready to continue her work, unaware that this simple act, serving a meal with dignity, a smile and care, would soon entangle her in a story of secrets, hidden truths, and moral reckonings that would challenge not only her courage, but the very fabric of the life she had always known. She was ready. Her ancestors, watching silently from the carved masks and painted murals around her, would not be disappointed. Tay sat at the head of the long, polished table, as if the room itself had been built to accommodate him. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off his gold cufflinks and the polished edges of his chair, but was not wealth alone that made him commanding. It was the aura of control he carried, a quiet arrogance that seemed to bend the space around him. Every movement was precise. The tilt of his hand as he perused the menu, the slight nod to the waiter, the subtle tap of his watch against the tabletop. Here was a man who had learned early that the world obeyed power, and yet, beneath the surface, a current of unease lingered, like a shadow trailing behind a great flame. His eyes scanned the room with a practiced attachment, observing the servers with a cool calculation. They moved swiftly, bending to protocol and expectation, but none could truly read him. To the casual observer, he was confident, charismatic, a figure who had achieved the apex of worldly success. Yet Tay's mind carried memories he buried deep, a ledger of secrets etched in the creases of his conscience. He had climbed the ladder of wealth with ruthless precision, making choices that left family ties frayed and friendships broken. Every handshake, every contract signed, every smile offered to secure favor had been weighed against his ambition. As Amelie approached his table, carrying the carefully arranged plate, Tay's gaze flickered briefly to her. There was a recognition, subtle and fleeting, in the way her eyes met his. Not fear, not deference. Something steadier, a moral clarity that spoke of a life guided by principles rather than power. He had seen many such faces in his ascent. Those who bowed, those who flattered, and those who simply endured. Amelie's presence, quiet yet unwavering, was different. It reminded him, though he would not admit it, of lessons he had long since pushed aside. Lessons his mother had whispered in the heat of family disputes. Lessons about integrity, about the unseen consequences of pride and greed. The restaurant seemed to mirror his internal struggle. The modern decor, the sleek lines of glass and steel, reflected the image he had crafted for the world: perfection, dominance, control. Yet the African art that adorned the walls, the carved masks with eyes hollowed like secrets, and the murals of ancestors and elders observing quietly from their painted worlds, seemed to challenge him. Each symbol was a silent accusation, a reminder that no matter how high he climbed, the moral laws of life could not be escaped. The eyes and the masks, the wisdom etched in the murals, and the whispers of unseen ancestors all pressed gently against the pride that had built him a kingdom, reminding him that power without virtue was fragile. He lifted the fork, paused, then set it down again, fingers brushing the edge of the plate. "The presentation is commendable," he murmured, his tone smooth, almost perfunctory. But the words were careful, measured. Beneath the polish of his demeanor, a flicker of vulnerability passed, an acknowledgement that in the quiet corners of the human heart, wealth could not shield one from conscience or consequence. The servers noticed nothing. They saw only the confident figure, the perfect posture, the calm expression. Yet Tay felt the subtle judgment of eyes not his own, the elder mentor observing from a distant table, the quiet whispers of other patrons, the flicker of curiosity in Amelie's gaze. In that moment, Tay's thoughts drifted to the roads he had traveled to arrive here. Deals made at the expense of trust, promises broken for profit, family ties severed for ambition. Each choice had elevated him in the eyes of the world, but left scars unseen, debts unpaid in the ledger of the soul. And now, seated in this temple of modernity adorned with ancestral symbols, he felt the tension of morality pressing against his carefully constructed image. He did not speak of it. He could not. Arrogance and pride were shields that had protected him for so long, yet they trembled under the weight of recognition. Recognition that life, like the carved masks, observes all acts, punishes all hubris, and rewards those who hold fast to truth. Amelie placed the plate before him. Her hands were steady, her eyes unwavering, yet he sensed something beneath her calm, the quiet courage of someone who understood the value of integrity. He offered a brief nod, a gesture that was polite but distant. The words he might have said, words to soften, to guide, or to confess, remained unspoken. Instead, he reached for the glass of water, his fingers brushing the crystal lightly, a subtle act of composure that belied the current swirling within him. Tay's mind, though concealed behind a mask of charisma, was already calculating, already aware that this encounter, this brief intersection with a humble but steadfast young woman, could unravel truths he had long sought to bury. The note, hidden beneath the plate, waited silently, holding secrets that would pierce the armor of his pride. He did not yet know the measure of its power, the way it would stir consequences that no wealth or status could prevent. He leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes scanning the restaurant once more, noting the patterns of observation, the silent judgments, and the ancestral symbols that lined the walls. He knew, somewhere deep in the unspoken corridors of his conscience, that the path ahead would demand reckoning. For all his achievements, all his opulence, the story of his life, like the murals and masks surrounding him, was bound to the eternal truths of justice, morality, and the delicate balance of human actions. A small sigh escaped him, almost unnoticed, but it was enough to betray the hint of an inner struggle. The billionaire CEO, powerful and untouchable in the eyes of the city, felt the first stirrings of vulnerability, and in that moment, even the polished grandeur of the restaurant could not shield him from the weight of destiny, from the subtle but insistent hand of fate, nor from the gaze of a young waitress whose courage and integrity would soon challenge the very core of his life. Amelie moved gracefully through the warm glow of the restaurant, her tray balanced expertly in her hands. Around her, life unfolded in a rhythm she knew well. The soft clatter of cutlery, murmurs of conversation, and the occasional laugh of patrons enjoying their evening. Yet it was not only the diners who watched her with careful eyes. Her colleagues, each carrying their own stories, observed her with a mix of fondness, concern, and unspoken expectation. Elder Nkosanathi, with silver hair and eyes like polished obsidian, stood near the entrance. He had been a server long before Amelie arrived, a man who had seen the world change around him but carried the wisdom of decades within his stooped frame. "Amelie," he said quietly as she passed, "remember, the heart guides the hand. Serve with truth, even when the eyes do not see." His voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of ancestral counsel. She nodded, a flicker of respect and gratitude in her eyes. Nkosanathi's words lingered, a gentle reminder that integrity would always illuminate the path, even in the shadow of arrogance or cruelty. Nearby, her younger co-workers moved with light-hearted energy. Themba, with a laugh that could fill the largest hall, teased about a minor spill of wine on the polished floor. "Amelie, one day you will trip over gold, and not a soul will notice," he joked, earning a quiet chuckle from her. These playful moments were not mere frivolity. They were threads of connection that bound the staff together, a small community within the grandeur of the restaurant. Each smile and jest reflected resilience, the courage to carry on in a world that often overlooked the humble. Observant patrons watched silently, some whispering comments about the elegant young woman with careful posture and unwavering hands. They did not know her story, the dreams she carried, the late nights she endured to help her family, or the quiet pride that shone from her modest heart. In their gaze, she felt a subtle mirror of society, some judgment, some admiration, and a reminder that the world's eyes rarely rest on truth alone. They often seek spectacle or weakness. Yet Amelie moved steadily, embodying a dignity that even their scrutiny could not shake. Her family, though not present in full, hovered in her consciousness like shadows at the edge of light. She thought of her mother, a woman whose hands were rough with labor but gentle with love, whose words had always carried both warmth and expectation. Amelie, her mother had said countless times, "We may not have gold or silver, but a heart of honesty is worth more than a crown." And her younger brother, mischievous yet bright, often reminded her why perseverance mattered. If you do right, Amelie, even the sky bends to help. These echoes of home grounded her, reminding her of the roots from which she had grown. The restaurant itself seemed alive, a microcosm of the city outside. The polished tables reflected the lights like water, yet the carvings and African sculptures lining the walls whispered of old wisdom. Each artifact was a silent observer, a guardian of morals, echoing lessons passed through generations. In their presence, Amelie felt the weight of tradition and community, a reminder that even amidst modernity and opulence, the values of honesty, humility, and courage remained enduring. As she approached Tay's table, the air shifted subtly. Elder Nkosinathi's eyes narrowed with quiet concern, sensing that something in the evening might test the young woman's resolve. Themba's grin faded into a cautious smile, knowing that Amelie's strength would soon be challenged in ways they could not foresee. Patrons leaned in, some unaware of the unfolding drama, yet the undercurrent of tension filled the space like a drumbeat, steady and insistent. Amelie placed a carefully prepared plate before Tay, her fingers brushing the edge with practiced precision. She kept her expression neutral, yet her mind raced. The whispers of her family, the quiet advice of Nkosinathi, and the subtle judgments of the patrons swirled together, a chorus guiding her next steps. The restaurant was not merely a place of service. It was a stage where morality, ambition, and fate intersected, where the choices of one young woman could ripple outward in ways unseen. As she stepped back, she glanced briefly at the other servers, catching their silent support. Themba's eyes sparkled with mischief, a reminder that even in trials, camaraderie could lend courage. Nkosinathi nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement that wisdom and patience would be her allies. And in that instant, Amelie felt the weight of expectation, not only from her immediate world, but from the ancestors and traditions embedded in or around her, the collective gaze of generations reminding her that virtue carries its own power. Then, as Tay studied his plate with a disinterested glance, Amelie felt the first prickle of unease. Something in the weight of his gaze, the cold precision of his movements, suggested a storm beneath the calm surface. She did not yet know the secret concealed beneath the plate, nor the hidden message that would soon demand her courage. But the presence of her family's teachings, her colleagues' guidance, and the silent judgment of ancestral symbols gave her a quiet strength. Here, within the bustling heart of a modern African city, amidst wealth and tradition, humility and pride, the stage was set. And Amelie, a young woman of modest means but profound integrity, stood ready to meet the unfolding destiny that would challenge not only her world, but the very soul of a powerful man. Amelie approached the table with a quiet grace, her hands steady despite the small flutter of nerves in her chest. The restaurant around her buzzed with light chatter and the delicate clinking of silverware, yet a hush seemed to settle as she neared Tay. He sat alone, a man draped in a suit that gleamed like the city's glass towers, his eyes sharp and assessing, as if measuring the world, and everyone in it, against a standard only he could see. "Good evening, sir," Amelie said, her voice soft but clear, carrying the warmth of respect. "Your order is ready." She placed the plate carefully before him, noting how the polished surface reflected the ambient lights and the subtle carvings on the walls. Each sculpture seemed to watch silently, a witness to human character and hidden truths. Tay barely looked up, his gaze tracing the plate with faint detachment. He nodded once, a motion more of acknowledgement than courtesy, and then returned his phone, scrolling with the practiced impatience of someone accustomed to the obedience of the world. Amelie's heart tightened slightly, but she reminded herself of Elder Nkosanathi's words. The heart guides a hand. Sir, with truth, even when the eyes do not see. As she turned to leave, she noticed a subtle shift in the air. The younger servers stole glances, their whispers caught in quick, cautious breaths. Themba, who always wore his laughter like armor, muttered under his breath, "Watch the storm before it falls, Amelie. Some men hide it well." Amelie only nodded, her mind occupied by the silent judgment of the patrons, the flicker of expectation in their eyes. When the table was cleared, she felt the weight of anticipation. The bill lay folded neatly beside the plate, as crisp and cold as the steel in the city skyline outside. With careful hands, she unfolded it, expecting at least a token of gratitude, but her eyes froze. A single, unremarkable note occupied the space where generosity or even acknowledgement should have been. 0, not even a mark of thanks. A flush rose in her cheeks, a bitter sting of humiliation that spread through her chest like wildfire. She stared at the empty tip, her mind wrestling with confusion and quiet indignation. Was this arrogance, indifference, or a subtle display of the divide between those born to privilege and those who must earn every morsel with sweat and prayer? She felt the weight of the room press upon her. Elder Nkosanathi's eyes lingered for a moment longer than usual, a silent question echoing in their depth. What will you do, child? Will you bend to the world's pride, or rise with the strength of your heart? Themba's gaze met hers across the room, a flicker of concern and shared frustration passing between them. Even the patrons, who had turned back to their meals, seemed to hum with a subtle awareness that something had shifted in the unseen currents of life. As Amelie reached to clear the plate, her fingers brushed against a folded slip hidden beneath it. Curious, she lifted it gently. The paper was thin, almost fragile, yet the words etched upon it carried weight heavier than any coin. Not everything is as it seems. Truth lies beneath the surface, and those who seek it may find more than they expect. Her breath caught. A chill ran along her spine as 1,000 questions flared in her mind. What truth? Whose hidden deeds were these? And why had it been left for her, a young waitress in a modest uniform, to uncover? Her eyes darted across the restaurant. Nkosanathi's gaze softened, but carried that same quiet warning. Themba's smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a wary curiosity. Even the silent sculpture seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Amelie's heart pounded with conflicting emotions. Humiliation, yes, but beneath it simmered a spark of curiosity, of intrigue that refused to be extinguished. The world had humiliated her, yet fate, it seemed, had whispered back, offering a thread she could follow. Her hands trembled slightly, but she folded the note with care, tucking it into her apron where it would rest against her heartbeat. She leaned slightly toward the empty table where Tay had sat, imagining his sharp eyes now concealed behind his confident mask. Who was this man who commanded skyscrapers and wealth, but left such a quiet, cryptic challenge behind? The disparity between his world and hers stretched vast, like the night sky above the city, dotted with lights she might never reach. Yet the note, so small, so unassuming, felt heavier than the richest gold. Elder Nkosanathi approached, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. "Amelie," he murmured, voice low, "sometimes a hand that gives nothing shows us more than the one that gives everything. Listen well to what is hidden. Child, the world does not reveal its secrets lightly." Amelie nodded, her mind a swirl of emotions. Indignation, curiosity, fear, and a strange, budding hope. She glanced at Themba, whose face held a mixture of anticipation and caution, and then back at the table. The plate had been cleared, the empty tip visible only in memory, yet the weight of its message lingered. It was a symbol, she realized, of a deeper truth, the divide between those who wield power without conscience and those who live with integrity. As she returned to her duties, The hum of the restaurant felt different. The conversations, the laughter, even the footsteps of patrons seemed imbued with a new rhythm. A story had begun, quiet and hidden, yet unmistakable in its resonance. Amelie's heart raced, for she knew that this single act, the discovery of a note beneath an empty plate, might be the thread that would unravel a far larger tapestry, one woven with ambition, arrogance, and the secrets of a man who held a city in his hand. She tucked the note carefully into her apron, feeling the fabric press against her chest. The weight was real, yet not burdensome. It was a call, a summons from fate itself. She felt the eyes of the restaurant upon her again, not in judgment, but in acknowledgment. Even the sculptures lining the walls seemed to hum with quiet encouragement, as though the ancestors themselves had placed their silent trust in her hands. Amelie drew a deep breath, steadying herself. Humiliation still lingered, a bitter spice on her tongue, but it was tempered by a rising determination. Somewhere beneath the layers of wealth and arrogance, she sensed a truth waiting to be revealed. And though she did not yet know its shape, she understood one thing clearly. The path ahead would test her courage, her patience, and the very integrity of her heart. But Amelie was ready. Even in the face of a man who seemed untouchable, even beneath the glittering towers in the cold, indifferent world, she carried something no wealth could buy: honesty, resilience, and a heart attuned to the lessons whispered by ancestors long before her. And in that heart lay the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of the restaurant, touching fate, justice, and the unseen hand that guides those willing to listen. Amelie's hands trembled slightly as she cleared the table, her heart still beating from the sting of humiliation. The air around her seemed heavier than before, thick with the silent judgment of unseen eyes. Patrons continued their conversations, yet she could almost hear their thoughts threading to the hum of cutlery and murmured words. How could a man so rich leave nothing? Who does he think he is? Her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the plate. She paused, something catching her attention, a faint outline, like a secret waiting patiently to be found. Carefully, she lifted the plate, and there it was, a small piece of paper, folded delicately, almost reverently, as if it had been waiting for her specifically. Her breath caught. The restaurant's elegant lighting reflected off the glass, casting shadows that danced like spirits on the wall. Amelie felt a shiver run down her spine, for she sensed that this was no ordinary note. She unfolded it with hands that were suddenly cautious, aware of the weight of discovery. Written in precise, almost cold handwriting, the words struck her like the first drumbeat of a ritual. Not everything is what it seems. Those who serve must sometimes see the hidden truth. What is revealed may bring justice or sorrow. Choose wisely, child of virtue. The message hung in the air, heavy as a midday sun over the city's towers. Amelie blinked, her mind spinning. Who would leave such a note? And why? Her fingers traced the words again, as if the ink could whisper its secrets to her soul. The cryptic message seemed to pulse with meaning. A silent drumbeat called her toward a path she did not yet understand. Elder Nkosanathi, passing by with his usual slow, deliberate steps, noticed her pause. "Amelie," he murmured, his voice gentle but weighted with authority. "Sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest burdens. The world hides its lessons in silence, in shadows, in what is left unsaid. This note, it is no mere scrap. It speaks of truth and consequence." Amelie's heart raced. She looked around the restaurant. The sleek decor, the African sculptures etched with symbols of wisdom, the walls that seemed to hum with ancestral whispers. Everything felt alive, as if the room itself recognized a moment and held its breath. Her co-workers stole glances at her, some with curiosity, some with worry, and Themba's usual jovial smile had vanished, replaced by a knowing frown. What does it mean?" Amelie asked quietly, almost to herself. Nkosanafi's eyes softened. "It means that you are at the crossroads, child. The hand that gives nothing sometimes reveals everything. It is up to you to follow the thread, or let it unravel alone." Amelie folded the note carefully, pressing it against her chest. The heat of her heartbeat seemed to seep into the paper, as if it could carry her courage into the world. She glanced back at the now empty table where Tay had sat. His presence lingered like a shadow, powerful and cold. Yet the note hinted at vulnerability, a secret hidden beneath the layers of wealth and arrogance. Her mind swirled with questions and doubts. Should she confront him? Or should she keep the secret close, deciphering it in the quiet of her small apartment later that night? The note felt alive, a messenger of fate that demanded attention. And deep within her, a spark of determination ignited. She would not let this opportunity pass. Something told her that the story behind this man and the message he left would test her heart, her courage, and the very principles she had lived by. Amelie's gaze drifted to the African masks and sculptures decorating the walls. She thought of her mother's tales of spirits and ancestors, of the lessons carried through generations about honesty, justice, and courage. Each carved face seemed to nod in silent encouragement. The note was more than a piece of paper. It was a challenge, a summons from forces she could feel, but not yet see. The restaurant continued its rhythm around her, but Amelie felt as though she had entered a different space, one where time bent, and every sound carried significance. The clinking of silverware became a drumbeat of destiny. The whispers of patrons became echoes of the ancestors. And in that moment, she understood that the note was not just a message. It was a mirror of the world's hidden truths, a reminder that even the proud and powerful could not escape the moral laws that govern all. Elder Nkosanathi's voice broke the spell of her reverie. Remember, Amelie, it is not always the sword that brings justice, but the heart that is steadfast. Guard this truth, but also let it guide your choices. Amelie nodded, her resolve settling like stone in her chest. She tucked the note safely into her apron, feeling its weight press against her side as a constant reminder. Humiliation still lingered from Tay's disregard, but had transformed into something else, a quiet, simmering determination. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The message promised trials, moral dilemmas, and the unveiling of hidden secrets. Yet she also felt a strange comfort, as if the ancestors themselves had placed their trust in her hands. Even Themba, watching from across the room, seemed to sense the change. His usual light-hearted demeanor was replaced with careful observation, understanding that Amelie had touched a current deeper than any of them could see. The subtle chorus of the restaurant, the laughter, the whispers, the rustle of aprons, became a backdrop for the story that was beginning, a tale woven with suspense, morality, and the unseen hands of fate. Amelie straightened, took a deep breath, and returned to her duties. Each step felt lighter, yet charged with purpose. The note would guide her, and she would follow its thread wherever it led, knowing that the small act of discovery, lifting a plate, finding a hidden message, could set in motion a story larger than herself, one that would test not only the character of a man who sat above the world in his towers, but the courage and virtue of a young woman grounded in her roots, her family, and her community. The message was a whisper, a challenge, a warning, and Amelie, heart steady and mind alert, was ready to listen. Amelie's hands hovered over the table, a quiet tremor betraying the storm inside her heart. She had spent years moving between tables, serving meals with a smile, carrying the pride of her family and community in her steps. Yet today, something had shaken that pride. The tip left behind by the man who had sat in the corner with cold eyes, Tay, the city's enigmatic billionaire, was nothing. Zero. Not a coin. Not even a glance of gratitude. Her chest tightened, the sting of humiliation sharper than any slap. The restaurant buzzed around her, filled with laughter and chatter, but Amelie felt a silence that was deafening, a hush that pressed against her ears. Each glance from her colleagues, from the patrons, felt like a needle. Some eyes were sympathetic, others curious, a few critical, reflecting the invisible scales of society. The disparity between the lives of the wealthy and the ordinary beat like a drum in the background of her mind. As she reached to clear the plate, a glint of white caught her eye. Something was tucked beneath the dish, folded in a manner that suggested careful intention. Her heart skipped, caught in a strange rhythm, as if the spirits of her ancestors were whispering warnings and encouragement all at once. With deliberate caution, Amelie lifted the plate. Beneath it lay a small, neatly folded note. She drew in a breath, her fingers brushing the paper as though it were a fragile bird, delicate and alive. The note seemed to hum with a presence, invisible yet weighty, holding secrets that had been waiting patiently to be discovered. Unfolding it, her eyes scanned the words, and a shiver ran down her spine. Not all is as it appears. The proud may rise, yet the truth lingers beneath. What is hidden will find its witness. The path you take will shape justice. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with a solemn rhythm, like the beat of a distant drum echoing across the city. Amelie felt her pulse quicken. This was no ordinary message. It was a summons, a moral challenge, a glimpse into a truth she had not yet dared to imagine. Elder Nkosinathi, her mentor and the quiet voice of wisdom in the restaurant, paused beside her. His eyes, deep and knowing, reflected the flickering lights of the restaurant and something older, something ancient. "Amelie," he said softly, "the world hides its lessons in what is unseen. Sometimes a plate, a note, a gesture, these carry the weight of fate. You have been given a choice and a responsibility." Amelie turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "But why me? Why now? What does it mean?" The elder's gaze did not waver. "Because you carry the heart to see, child. The proud may command towers and riches, but the truth is patient. It waits for eyes that can discern it, hearts that can bear it. This note, it is a mirror, a messenger. What it speaks is bound to the past, yet it reaches into the future." Her hands tightened around the paper. Her mind raced, torn between fear and curiosity. The note spoke of hidden truths, of justice, of consequences that were yet unseen. And it hinted, barely, delicately, at a secret link to Tay, the man who seemed untouchable in his arrogance and wealth. Around her, the restaurant continued its rhythm, oblivious to the quiet thunder rolling inside her chest. The laughter of patrons, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of menus. It all became a backdrop of the story unfolding before her. The ordinary world carried on, but Amelie felt herself stepping into a space beyond ordinary sight, a space where moral choices weighed heavier than gold. She thought of the sculptures adorning the walls, carved faces with eyes that seemed to follow her, symbols of wisdom passed down through generations. They seemed to nod in solemn understanding, as if affirming the gravity of the moment. The note was not merely paper. It was a bridge between past and present, between human ambition and the unseen laws of morality. Amelie's gaze shifted to Tay, whose empty table stood as a monument to power and indifference. He was gone, yet present in the weight of the note, in the cold precision of the words left behind. It was as though the man's pride had summoned a reckoning, and now fate had chosen Amelie as its witness. Her colleagues stole glances, sensing the subtle shift in her demeanor. Themba, usually quick with jokes and laughter, regarded her with a quiet curiosity, understanding that something profound had occurred. The elder mentor stepped back, leaving Amelie with the paper that trembled slightly in her hands. What should I do?" she whispered, the question more to herself than to anyone else. Nkosinathi smiled faintly, the lines of his face deepened by years of knowledge. "You must listen, Amelie. Listen to the words, listen to your heart, and let the path reveal itself. This note carries a secret, a lesson, and perhaps a chance for justice. How you act will matter, not just for yourself, but for the man it speaks of, and for the balance that has been waiting to be restored." Amelie folded the note carefully, pressing it to her chest. The sting of humiliation faded slightly, replaced by a quiet determination. The moment that had begun with embarrassment had transformed into purpose. She understood that the note was more than a message. It was the first step in a journey that would test her courage, her wisdom, and her moral strength. As she returned to her duties, the rhythm of her movements carried a new weight. Every step, every gesture felt significant. The note, safely tucked against her heart, pulsed with the promise of secrets yet to be uncovered, and of a moral journey she was only beginning to understand. The message hinted at justice, at karmic reckoning, and at the hidden past of the man who had left her so shaken. Amelie's eyes lingered on the restaurant's decorations, the patrons, and the shimmering city skyline beyond the glass. The world was the same, yet somehow it was different now. The note had opened a door, and beyond it lay choices, truths, and consequences that would ripple through lives and hearts alike. With a steady breath, she whispered a quiet promise to herself and to the unseen ancestors whose wisdom guided her. "I will see the truth, and I will act with honor. Whatever lies ahead, I will not falter." In that moment, Amelie's journey began. The note had found her, and she had found her purpose. The first thread of the story that would weave through power, morality, and destiny had been pulled, and nothing would ever be the same again. Amelie's hands trembled slightly as she placed the last dish on the table and stepped back. The plate had been cleared, the utensils arranged neatly, yet the space left behind felt empty in a way that pinched her pride. Tay's absence was heavy, and the zero tip he had left like a cold stone lodged in her heart. She could feel the eyes of the restaurant upon her, not openly hostile, but weighing her like a whispered judgment. The subtle hum of gossip in the air almost visible. The elders of the restaurant, a chorus of wisdom and experience, leaned on counters and chairs. They did not speak aloud, yet Amelie felt their presence. Elder Nkosanathi, the keeper of patience and understanding, gave her a look that was more question than statement, his eyes like wells reflecting both the city lights and the ancient truths of their land. "Child," whispered Zanil, the jovial waitress whose laughter usually bounced across the room. Sometimes the pride of the rich hides behind silence, but the eyes of the community are not so easily fooled. Amelie's chest tightened. Her colleagues murmured among themselves, their voices a soft undercurrent of concern and commentary. Some shook their heads in quiet disapproval. Others shrugged. Some even whispered Teske that carried the weight of expectation. Outside, the city moved relentlessly, a tide of ambition and noise. The skyscrapers of glass and steel glimmered, reflecting the sun like mirrors of greed, while down below, narrow alleys and market stalls clung to the earth, humble but persistent, alive with the laughter, chatter, and bargaining of ordinary people. Inside the restaurant, Amelie felt this tension, the clash between the world of the billionaires and the world she inhabited, between wealth that commanded respect and humility that earned it quietly. She glanced at the other patrons, minor characters in this unfolding tale. Their eyes flickered briefly toward her, then away, a silent chorus assessing, judging. Some noticed her flush of embarrassment. Some were quick-swallowed to hide it. Some simply watched with the detached curiosity of spectators. In this, the African storytelling tradition revealed itself. The community, silent yet alive, observing and reflecting the moral fabric of the moment. Elder Nkosanathi stepped closer, his voice low, but carrying the weight of generations. "Amelie, remember this," he said, his words a drumbeat against the quiet tension. "In our stories, the actions of one are never alone. The deeds of the proud, the careless, the arrogant, they ripple through the eyes of the people. The community sees. The ancestors see. Even the wind remembers." Amelie swallowed hard, feeling the truth of his words sink into her bones. The note under the plate, still folded and small, throbbed with importance in her pocket. It was more than paper. It was a summons, a messenger of hidden justice, and now it was entwined with the eyes of the community, who watched her quietly, their judgment subtle yet inescapable. Across the room, the waitress Themba muttered under his breath, "He can own towers, he can chase gold, but it cannot escape the eyes of those who see beyond the surface." His words were faint, almost lost beneath the clatter of dishes and muted conversations, yet they carried the ancient resonance of African morality. The rich and proud may rise, but truth is not so easily hidden. A young couple near the window, previously laughing and leaning into their own stories, had gone silent. Their attention now subtly shifted to Amelie. Even the chef, busy at the open kitchen, cast a glance that held both curiosity and tacit approval. In the African storytelling tradition, every observer, every whispered murmur, was a thread in the communal tapestry. Their presence, however silent, magnified the moral weight of the moment. Amelie felt her face warm, not from shame alone, but from the sudden clarity of her role. She was no longer simply a waitress serving a billionaire. She was a participant in a moral stage, a character whose choices and courage would echo beyond this table, beyond this restaurant. The note in her pocket had shifted her from observer to actor. Zanil, sensing Amelie's moment of reckoning, leaned close. "You see, Amelie," she whispered, "we are all watched by the living and by those who came before. Every action, every choice, it is reflected in the eyes of those who care, in the stories yet to be told. Your courage here, even in silence, is a story waiting to be heard." The elders nodded quietly, their collective gaze affirming the lesson. Emily understood now that the humiliation she had felt was a spark, a signal from fate, and the community's watchful eyes were both jury and witness. This was not mere embarrassment. It was a summons to act, to follow the note's cryptic message, to confront the moral landscape that Tay's arrogance had revealed. Her colleagues whispered quietly among themselves, each word a ripple across the fabric of the restaurant. "Did you see?" one said softly. "She found it, the note." Another shook their head. "The man thinks he can ignore us all, but even he is not above the eyes of the people." Emily clutched the folded paper, feeling the rhythm of her heart align with the silent chorus around her. She could sense the moral weight in every glance, every murmur, every quiet reflection. The community's observation was more than judgment. It was a guide, a chorus echoing the ancient African truth. No act of pride, arrogance, or deceit escapes the watchful eyes of society and the spirits of ancestors. Steeling herself, Emily took a breath and let the hush of the restaurant sink into her. The note would lead her forward, but the community's gaze reminded her of her responsibility, not just to herself, but to the balance of justice that had been quietly disturbed. The symbolic power of the note, the plate, and the observing crowd was clear. The world had watched Tay's arrogance, and now it watched Emily's response. Elder Nkosanathi's voice, soft but firm, echoed again in her mind. The eyes of the many see what the prideful cannot. Your path is now intertwined with truth, courage, and the judgment of the people. Walk carefully, Emily, for every step shapes the story yet to come. With that, she turned back to her work, the note safely tucked against her heart. The murmurs of the community continued, a chorus of silent observers, subtle yet profound. They reflected the societal hierarchy, the invisible scales of justice, and the moral scrutiny that every action, no matter how small, carried in the world of men and the stories of the ancestors. Emily's eyes, steady now, caught the shimmer of African sculptures on the walls, their carved faces seeming to nod in approval. The restaurant, once a place of ordinary service, had transformed into a stage of moral reckoning, where the proud and the humble alike were observed, judged, and guided by the communal conscience. The stage was set. The note, the observers, and the weight of Tay's hidden past had all converged. Emily knew that her next steps would not just be about serving tables. They would be about understanding, choosing, and responding to a moral call that transcended the ordinary world, echoing the timeless truths of African tales where community, justice, and fate intertwine. Emily wiped the sweat from her brow as she adjusted the tray in her hands. The restaurant around her buzzed with soft conversation and the gentle clinking of fine cutlery. But her mind was elsewhere. Tay, the mysterious man who had just left her table, had left not a single coin for her service. A zero tip that burned her pride like the sun on the African plains. Her chest tightened, her fingers trembled, and yet, beneath the humiliation, something stirred, a curiosity that refused to be quieted. The walls of the restaurant glimmered with modern elegance. Sleek marble floors, polished steel tables, glass chandeliers reflecting the afternoon light. Yet, among the modernity, African sculptures and paintings held their silent watch. Faces carved from what seemed to whisper truths long forgotten, the gaze of ancestral eyes following every move of those within. Emily felt it, a pulse of wisdom threading through the space, urging her to notice what others might miss. Elder Nkosanathi, the restaurant's longtime mentor to all staff, leaned on his cane with a knowing expression. His eyes were pools of patience and experience, reflecting the lives of those who had walked these city streets for decades. "Child," he said softly, "sometimes the proud fall quietly, and sometimes their silence is louder than the roar of 1,000 tongues. Watch, learn, and hold fast to what is right." Emily swallowed hard, glancing at the plate Tay had left behind. As if guided by fate, she noticed a small corner of paper tucked beneath it. Her heart leapt. She picked it up carefully, as if touching it might awaken some hidden spirit. The note was cryptic, a mystery pressed into her palm like the final drumbeat of a story waiting to unfold. Nearby, her colleague Zanil, ever the voice of cheer, leaned closer. "Emily," she whispered, "even the richest cannot hide from the eyes of those who see. Do not let this man's arrogance steal your peace. There is more in that paper than his pride could ever imagine." Other staff members murmured among themselves, their eyes flickering toward Emily and the note. Some shook their heads. their expressions a mix of sympathy and worry. The patrons, oblivious or polite, became a subtle chorus, the silent witnesses to an invisible moral stage. Every glance, every murmur, every shifting chair spoke of observation and judgment, the echoes of the community's conscience made tangible. Amelie held the note close, her mind racing. What could it mean? Was it a confession? A warning? A hidden truth about the man who seemed to have the world at his feet, yet left her so coldly dismissed? She remembered her family's teachings, the old tales of the elders. When a small paper carries weight, it is not the paper that is heavy, it is the truth it bears. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Skyscrapers of glass and steel reflected sunlight like mirrors, a stark contrast to the narrow, lively alleys and the colorful market stalls below. The world Amelie moved through was one of contrasts of wealth and modesty, ambition and honesty. Tay embodied the modern rush, the unrelenting pursuit of power. Amelie, humble yet proud, represented the enduring values of her community, honesty, courage, and resilience. She glanced around the room. Elder Nkosinathi's gaze never left her, and in it she saw approval, caution, and hope. Zanil gave her a small, encouraging smile. Even Themba, quiet and thoughtful, whispered, "The rich may climb towers, child, but they do not escape the watchful eyes of the people." Amelie's hands shook as she unfolded the note. The words inside were jagged and hurried, yet they carried weight. A hidden truth, a moral seed, a spark that promised change. She felt the eyes of the restaurant upon her, felt the quiet judgment of the community as tangible as the carved faces on the walls. Each observer, though silent, had become part of the tale, reflecting the ancient African storytelling tradition in which society itself watches, judges, and guides. The note whispered of secrets, of past betrayals, of wealth won through pride and cunning, of a reckoning yet to come. Amelie's heart pounded, a drumbeat echoing the tension in the air. She had a choice: ignore the message, confront it, or seek the counsel of her family. Each path promised uncertainty. Each path tested her courage and morality. Her colleagues continued their silent chorus. Some spoke quietly, offering advice cloaked as gossip. "She has found it. The truth hides in that small paper," murmured Zanil. "He thinks he can command respect with money alone," said another. The elder's eyes, however, held no doubt. This was a turning point, a moment when fate, morality, and ambition intersected. Amelie exhaled slowly. The weight of community's gaze, the hidden wisdom of her elders and strange, trembling message of the note settled upon her like a mantle. She was no longer merely a waitress. She was a character in a living tale, a story unfolding before the eyes of all. The zero tip was not just a slight. It was the first tremor in a moral earthquake that would shake not only her world, but Tay's as well. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron. The anticipation of discovery mingled with the fear of confrontation. Every eye in the room, every whisper of the staff, every carved face on the walls seemed to pulse with the same question. What would she do next? The elders' wisdom and the community's watchful eyes were a silent drumbeat urging her forward, reminding her that in African tales, the actions of the humble often illuminate the paths of the proud. Amelie took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the city, the weight of history, and the responsibility of truth in her hands. She knew that this small paper, overlooked and hidden, carried the seed of justice and revelation. The story had begun, the moral reckoning had been set in motion, and the collision between ambition and integrity was imminent. The eyes of the people, alive with silent judgment and expectation, would bear witness to the unfolding of a tale as old as time. Where pride is measured, humility is tested, and the moral hard community guides the fate of all. The sun outside began to dip, casting long shadows across the city streets, reflecting the contrast of wealth and modesty, power and humility. Inside the restaurant, Amelie's gaze met Elder Nkosinathi's once more. In the quiet understanding between them, she felt the ancestral stories pulse through her veins. The note had chosen her as its bearer, the community its witness, and Tay, the proud, the ambitious, was about to be tested by a force he had never understood. The moral weight of truth and the unblinking eyes of those who see beyond wealth. Amelie's fingers brushed the note again. The whispers of the restaurant grew faint but clear in their intent. The moral path had begun. The suspense thickened, and the first chapter, a story rooted in the rhythm of African life, justice, and tradition, had been written. The stage was set. Fate, community, and morality had converged in a single moment, and in that convergence, Emily felt the stirrings of courage, the call to action, and the promise that even the humblest among them could shape the course of justice, weaving the threads of honor, integrity, and ancestral guidance into a tale that would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant.